Guthrie's abduction. Today, authorities released previously inaccessible surveillance video and photos of a possible suspect. As Jared Hill explains, the images show a masked person outside her home.
Darkness enveloped a quiet home in the city of Tucson on a late January night. There were no screams, no sudden bursts of panic, but a meticulously calculated crime was silently unfolding right before the eyes of the most modern technological devices. An 84-year-old woman carrying the pulse of an emergency medical device disappeared without a trace except for scattered drops of blood on the porch and a security system intentionally destroyed. The disappearance of Mrs. Nancy Guthrie was not just an ordinary kidnapping case, but a haunting puzzle for the authorities. Let us pull back the curtain on the details of this mystery right now. Don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts, hit like, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next dramatic case files. To grasp the full horror of this incident, we need to turn back time and look at the victim through the most raw human lens possible. Mrs. Nancy Guthrie was not a young woman who loved spontaneous adventures or lived a wild, unregulated lifestyle. At 84 years old, her life was defined by daily repetitive habits, strict medical needs, and close bonds with her family members. She had a pacemaker, a device not only to sustain life, but also a signal station continuously reporting her health status. The fact that she left her home in the middle of the night without taking her phone is completely contrary to all logic and reason. The evening of January 31st passed peacefully after she spent a warm evening gathered with her loved ones. There were no signs of anxiety, no desperate calls for help, and no psychological disturbances before she entered the house. Such ordinary moments happen millions of times every single day all over the world and are often forgotten the moment dawn breaks. But for the Guthrie family, that was the last peaceful memory before a devastating nightmare ripped their world apart. An unforeseen horror sliced through that fragile peace, instantly transforming the house into a chilling crime scene, shrouded in unsolved mysteries. According to investigative documents released later, everything began to unravel in the dark early hours of February 1st. The doorbell camera system, a common surveillance tool meant to bring peace of mind to homeowners, captured one fleeting yet utterly haunting image. A shadowy figure appeared at the door, carrying a backpack, wearing gloves with their face completely covered and notably gripping an object that looked unmistakably like a weapon. This individual moved with none of the clumsy or confused gestures of a petty thief who had simply wandered by chance. Instead, they moved with cold, deliberate purpose, aiming straight at the recording device and disabling it in an instant. The deliberate destruction of the security camera was not just a minor technical detail, it revealed chilling insight into the perpetrator's cold psychology and meticulous level of preparation. Knowing the exact location of the device, approaching it without the slightest hesitation, and handling it with surgical precision proved that this person had carefully studied the terrain long beforehand. This was not a spontaneous crime or an impulsive act born from lack of control. It was a meticulously detailed, coldly calculated plan that demanded patience, sharp observation skills, and a chilling degree of ruthlessness. When criminals act with such icy control, it means they have already prepared multiple scenarios to outmaneuver the authorities. What do you think really happened in those terrifying 30 minutes after the security system was disabled? The silence that swallowed the house the moment the camera went dark was not peace. It was a deadly, suffocating void. Less than half an hour later, a second system went dead, and this time it was a matter of life and death. The connection signal from Nancy's heart rate monitoring device suddenly flatlined and completely vanished. Two completely independent systems, one guarding the home and one monitoring a fragile life, both went ominously silent within an extremely tight time frame. The probability of this happening by pure coincidence is almost zero. The synchronized failure of these two independent devices created a razor-sharp timeline, allowing investigators to lock down the exact window in which the crime unfolded. It was an extremely short window of time, but more than enough for a stranger to slip inside, overpower a defenseless elderly woman, and drag her out of the one place she was supposed to be safest. The scene inside the house the next morning only reinforced the chilling hypothesis of a brutal kidnapping. Personal phones, wallets, and everyday items that anyone would grab if they were leaving the house voluntarily, all remained untouched exactly in their original positions. There was no packed luggage, no hurried preparation, and absolutely no sign of a voluntary departure. Investigators quickly uncovered another damning detail: the back door of the house had been left wide open. The wide-open back door didn't just reveal the intruder's entry point or escape route, it painted a clear, chilling trail of movement leading straight from the inside out. But what instantly transformed this case from a troubling disappearance into a full-blown criminal investigation were the ominous bloodstains discovered on the porch. Subsequent lab results confirmed the grim truth: the blood was indeed Nancy's. This cold physical evidence shattered any lingering hope that this had been nothing more than an ordinary medical accident. At that point, the investigation was forced to abandon its entire initial approach and pivot sharply. Authorities were no longer searching for a confused elderly woman who might have wandered off. They were now hunting a violent predator who had struck in the dead of night. The entire scene was immediately cordoned off, and hundreds of police officers, along with federal agents, were rapidly mobilized. They began working from the epicenter of the house, methodically expanding the search circle outward with grim determination to uncover even the smallest clue. In cases where the scene is this tightly controlled, every single object and every faint trace left behind, no matter how minor, can carry the crushing weight of the entire answer. A faint glimmer of hope emerged when searchers discovered a single glove discarded just a few miles from the house. This item had a shape and color strikingly similar to the glove worn by the masked intruder while disabling the doorbell camera. In the ruthless arena of modern criminal investigation, a single piece of evidence capable of holding DNA is like a golden key that can unlock even the darkest mystery. All eyes instantly locked onto the forensic testing center. The glove was dissected with forensic precision and ruthlessly cross-referenced against a massive national database. However, the result that came back was a crushing disappointment. No DNA match was found. That is the brutal reality of complex investigations where fragile hope and crushing disappointment constantly intertwine. From the public's perspective, people always expect an investigation to unfold in a clean, straight line, each clue leading neatly to the next discovery, then to the identification of a suspect, and finally to swift justice. But in reality, cases often crawl forward along a tortuous path riddled with dead ends and invisible walls of resistance. A piece of evidence that seemed like a decisive turning point eventually became a dead end, forcing investigators all the way back to the starting line. The momentum of the investigation never stopped, but its speed certainly ground to a frustrating crawl. While the physical evidence seemed to vanish into total darkness, another shocking development suddenly began to completely reshape the entire landscape of the case. The flood of tips from the public pouring into the investigative agency began to skyrocket as the case crossed local boundaries and exploded into a national media frenzy. Thousands of frantic calls and tens of thousands of urgent messages flooded in every single day, each one offering a potential clue. The investigative team faced crushing pressure as they desperately tried to filter through the overwhelming flood of information. Ignoring even one small but accurate detail could lead to disastrous consequences. Yet the brutal reality was that most tips were baseless, fueled only by wild rumors and unfounded speculation. Processing this overwhelming flood of information demanded an enormous expenditure of time and manpower. Time in kidnapping cases is never a neutral factor. It is the most ruthless and dangerous enemy. The first days dragged by in a terrifying silence, and as the first week ended with no positive signs whatsoever, a dark sense of dread began to spread like wildfire. The public began to openly question the effectiveness of the investigation, while the victim's family endured immeasurable mental torture. As every path seemed hopelessly blocked, the case began to shift dramatically in the public's perception. If you're fascinated by mysterious cases and crave the deepest, most gripping analyses, take a second right now to hit like and subscribe to our channel. Your support is a powerful motivation for us to keep delivering the most accurate and compelling information. Returning to the case, the absence of any official conclusions created the perfect void for misleading rumors and wild speculation to start creeping in. This was also the moment the first ransom letters surfaced, ushering in a far darker and more twisted phase of the nightmare. Initially, these ransom messages carried a chillingly clear structure directly targeting the victim's family with very specific and ruthless financial demands. What made these first letters particularly chilling was that they contained several intimate details that had never been publicly released by the media. Possessing information never meant for the public proved the sender had a direct connection to the case, or at least stood close enough to the inner circle to grasp confidential developments. Famous journalist Savannah Guthrie, who is also a relative of the victim, later revealed that the family had believed those initial ransom messages were chillingly authentic. For families plunged into tragedy, they always develop a razor-sharp instinct to distinguish a real threat from a cruel scam. Was the police silence in those early days a calculated investigative tactic, or simply a desperate stalemate against an overwhelming flood of information? Investigators did not take these first ransom letters lightly at all. They immediately traced every path the money might take, closely monitored all communication channels, and worked relentlessly to pinpoint whether these messages could lead them straight to a specific location. The entire operation unfolded in absolute silence, carefully designed to avoid tipping off the kidnappers. However, despite mobilizing the most advanced technological resources, these intense efforts still failed to deliver a final breakthrough. No location was ever confirmed, the victim remained missing without a single word, and the identity of the monster behind it all stayed shrouded in darkness. As time dragged mercilessly on a strange and unsettling shift in the kidnapper's mode of communication suddenly emerged, completely shattering the investigative agency's entire assessment. New letters were no longer sent directly to the victim's family. Their target had coldly shifted toward major media outlets. Not only did the recipients change, but the structure and tone of these messages turned dramatically different, colder, more calculated, and far more menacing than before. Consistency vanished, completely replaced by a confusing storm of chaos and glaring contradictions. One message coldly claimed that Nancy had already passed away, while another, sent just moments later, declared that someone had just spotted her still alive in the Sonora area. The sudden mention of Sonora, a state lying just across the border in Mexico, a mere 70 miles south of Tucson, dropped a devastating bombshell straight into the heart of the investigation. This geographical distance wasn't overwhelmingly far and could be crossed in a relatively short time, yet it carried extremely complex and dangerous legal implications. Once a case showed clear signs of crossing international borders, every ordinary investigative procedure became exponentially more difficult and tangled. Issues of jurisdiction, international cooperation, and clashing legal systems instantly erected massive, frustrating obstacles. A short distance of just a few dozen miles suddenly transformed into a deep, impenetrable abyss, separating the authorities from the truth. Was the sudden appearance of this new geographical factor actually an invaluable clue, or merely a sophisticated decoy designed to mislead the authorities? For many analysts, dropping a specific place name like Sonora into the letters was likely a cold psychological trick designed to scatter police resources across a vast and chaotic area. However, the authorities could not afford to subjectively dismiss any hypothesis. A single overlooked detail could cost an innocent human life. Therefore, this information had to be rigorously verified, despite the overwhelming difficulties closing in from every side, even if it demanded costly cross-border coordination and immense resources. These contradictory messages transformed the case from a straightforward hunt for criminal evidence into a brutal battle against a relentless wave of disinformation. The shift from a tightly controlled environment to one of total instability unleashed an entirely new and far more dangerous set of challenges. The work of the authorities was no longer simply to distinguish truth from the unknown. It had become far more treacherous. They now had to tear apart truth from deliberately crafted lies. Imposters began crawling out of the woodwork, blurring the big picture into an even more chaotic nightmare. The investigation fractured into two brutal fronts, one grinding forward on the ground with physical evidence, and the other desperately battling to control a wildfire of rumors raging across cyberspace. Former agent Tracy Walder, while dissecting this case, spotlighted one extremely suspicious detail about the exact timing of the final ransom letters. She noted that these final ransom messages appeared on the exact day journalist Savannah Guthrie returned to television work after more than 2 months of painful absence caused by the family tragedy. This coincidence was far too perfect to be dismissed as mere chance. It strongly suggested that the sender of the letters didn't actually care about the money at all. His true goal was to hijack public attention, ruthlessly exploiting the media frenzy to feed his own sick hunger for notoriety. This is classic behavior for those who thrive on manipulating the psychology of the masses. Furthermore, the amount of money demanded in the letters sent to the press was shockingly lower than the massive multi-million-dollar reward that the family and federal agencies had publicly pledged to anyone who provided accurate information leading to Nancy's safe return. This went completely against every shred of normal criminal psychological logic. If the perpetrator truly held Nancy's location and genuinely wanted the ransom, they would have chosen a secure, discreet channel to demand the maximum amount possible, not orchestrate a loud, chaotic public drama that delivered far less financial gain. This glaring absurdity only strengthened the chilling belief that those final messages were never a genuine ransom demand. They were a calculated effort to sabotage the entire investigation. The relentless flood of conflicting information didn't just cripple the police, it delivered devastating, soul-crushing psychological blows to Nancy's already shattered family. Their emotions were viciously stretched between two extremes, plunging into total despair one moment upon hearing Nancy had been killed, then flickering with fragile, agonizing hope the next, when reports claimed she was still alive somewhere in Mexico. For the public, the case might simply be another gripping mystery story updated through daily news reports. But for the victim's family, there was no rest, not even for a single second. The crushing silence from the investigative agency combined with the deafening noise of the public created an unbearably harsh and suffocating environment. Parallel to the twisting developments of the case, the local law enforcement agency itself was spiraling into a serious crisis of public trust. The Pima County Board of Supervisors formally demanded that Sheriff Chris Nanos explain critical issues regarding his leadership capacity and the overall operation of the Sheriff's Department, all within just 10 working days. Although this internal investigation did not directly declare that the case had been mishandled from the very beginning, its timing could not have been more devastatingly sensitive. When a shocking kidnapping case remains unsolved, even the slightest hint of instability within the leadership is more than enough to ignite explosive public outrage. These administrative troubles unintentionally added another thick, suffocating layer of fog over the entire agonizing case. People were no longer just terrified of a hidden monster still lurking out there. They had begun to seriously doubt whether those sworn to protect them even had the ability to do so. Trust, that vital bridge for public cooperation, was quietly crumbling away. Questions kept exploding, not only about the true identity of the perpetrator, but also about the real competence of those entrusted with uncovering the truth. Once trust has been cracked, every single statement from the authorities is mercilessly scrutinized through a lens of deep skepticism. Despite all the surrounding chaos and troubles, we cannot deny that the origin of this case still rests on extremely clear physical evidence foundations that no amount of rumors can ever erase. A real shadowy figure appeared before the camera lens, the cold interference with a life-sustaining medical device actually happened, and the blood left on the porch stood as undeniable proof of a violent act. Authorities were far from stagnant despite the harsh public criticism suggesting otherwise. Mobilizing hundreds of detectives, meticulously analyzing hours of traffic camera footage, and quietly coordinating with major retail corporations to trace the exact origin of that backpack, all demonstrated a tireless, relentless effort behind the scenes. The core issue did not lie in any lack of action by the police, but in the brutal reality that all those efforts had not yet connected into a single, complete picture. Each clue collected was like a single isolated piece of a massive, maddening jigsaw puzzle. Analyzing the precise direction of movement and meticulously tracking every second of the timeline before the pacemaker app flatlined were all carried out with painstaking precision. But those scattered pieces still refused to form a specific name, a clear motive, or a final destination. This is the harsh, unforgiving nature of criminal investigation. The truth sometimes demands a level of patience that stretches far beyond ordinary human limits. The fact that the case is gradually slipping into a quiet state does not mean it has been forgotten. On the contrary, the less information released to the outside, the more intense and meticulously hidden undercover investigative activities are surging behind the scenes. One of the leading hypotheses is that the authorities are deliberately staying silent about major breakthroughs, especially any critical clues tied to the Sonora area. This tactical silence is a vital weapon, a calculated move to avoid spooking the enemy and forcing them deeper into the shadows. If the perpetrator believes he has successfully outsmarted the police, he may finally let his guard down and reveal a fatal flaw in his next move. However, the line between a brilliant investigative strategy and a genuine paralyzing stalemate is sometimes razor thin. Every single day that passes without a shred of new information cuts even deeper into the hearts of the victim's family and fuels growing frustration across the entire community. The crushing pressure of time now came not only from the desperate fight to preserve the victim's life, but also from the urgent need to maintain fragile social order. Contradictory messages flooding the media, internal investigations, targeting police leadership, and the family's raw desperation have forged an invisible yet crushing weight on the shoulders of those tasked with solving the case. This case serves as stark warning for communities to remain vigilant and not rely solely on security devices. In the deep now, be aware to hoax buzz avert, spreading misguiding information that impedes the investigation and brings grim hurt to the target. It can be said that Nancy Guthrie's case has moved far beyond an ordinary search framework and emerged as a symbol of clash between silent truth and loud disinformation itself now. Although everything remains shrouded in a dense fog, the search has certainly never come to a halt. The initial evidence still remains quietly waiting for the moment it can finally be fully connected. The blood on the porch, the silence of the doorbell system, and the halted heartbeat will forever stand as witnesses reminding us of a journey that remains unfinished. If this video gave you deep insight, please remember to like and subscribe so you never miss upcoming developments in other shocking cases ahead today now.